Hello, everyone, and welcome to a very special episode of In a Nutshell at the Northeast Georgia History Center. We are very excited today because this is a topic that is near and dear to our hearts. And because it is so special, I have brought in a historian, Dr. Thomas Greene from University of North Georgia. Thank you for being here with us.
Well, thank you for having me. It's fantastic. It's fantastic to be in the space for the live stream. I've been on a couple podcasts, but it's nice to be here in person.
Yes, it's very good to have you in person and see your face. Tell them just a little bit about your past, your experience, and what your focus is.
Sure. So I'm a medieval historian. I did my degree at Loyola University Chicago, where I focused on monasticism in the early Middle Ages. So for me, that's the second half of the 9th century. I focused on the sensory and emotional experiences of monastic or religious practice. And my research interests continue in that direction, but I'm also very much interested in historical memory, both in the past with the object we'll talk about today, and in the present, in what we call medievalism, which is the remembering of the medieval past, but applied to contemporary contexts.
Right, and there's a lot of people out there that are into medievalism.
Yes.
Right, in good and bad and weird ways, but that's another story for another day. So we're going to talk today about the Bayeux Tapestry. Yes, it's an embroidery, but that's just what you call it. But we want to do a quick sum up. So, to sum up, the year is 1066. England loses its king, King Edward the Confessor. He dies without an heir. There is some question as to who's supposed to be king based on which version of the story you read. Is it Norman Duke William? Is it English Duke Harold? Long story short, Harold becomes king. So, I'm sorry, he actually died in late 1065, buried on Christmas Day. So, everyone gets upset that they weren't given the crown of England. So, Duke William of Normandy sets a huge army together, starts building ships, comes to take over England, but before he gets there, another army from the north, led by Harold Hardrada of Norway, comes into the area around York, defeats an English army, thinks he's got it made. Harold rides up, defeats that army, and while he's up there, finds out that Duke William of Normandy has landed in the south, has to turn around, take his army all the way back south. After a long, hard-fought battle at the Battle of Hastings, Harold is defeated. William sort of circles the area around London for a couple of months and is crowned on Christmas Day, 1066, King of the English. It's a year of 3 kings. It's a year of a lot of battles, and it totally shifts the history of England. In one of the more significant ways, it shifts its focus from Scandinavia and shifts it to Europe because that's where Normandy is, and William is King of the English and Duke of the Normans. So how is he going to establish his reign and make sure that everyone understands not only is he the new king, but he is new king by a good way and the right story? And so we have the Bayeux Tapestry to tell that story. Is that a fair summation?
I think it is a great summation, and bringing in all of the players and what's a complicated story. The Bayeux Tapestry is, I think it is about not just the battle itself, but the claims for kingship and a justification for those claims. One of the interesting things about the tapestry is that it spends a lot of time on the prehistory leading up to 1066. That Harold, for somebody who loses the battle and loses the kingship of England, he's a remarkably prominent player in the tapestry. And one of the things when we think about explaining that tapestry, then that story, is why is Harold so prominent? Right? Why does the loser get the first third of the tapestry, really telling his story? And it has to be about that contest for the throne, right? It isn't a simple matter of succession where the younger son, well, in this case, Edward was childless, of course, but the younger son or the closest living male blood relative would inherit because there was a closest living male blood relative in exile who comes back. In the
he was what, 9? He was like 9
he was
years
young,
old.
but that hasn't stopped people from being put in into kingship with counselors and regents before. So it's a fascinating story because it's so complicated.
Right. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of look at the tapestry, different panels. We have some technology we want to be able to shift through the tapestry and kind of show you the exact things we're looking about. in terms of how it's woven, in terms of how it's created, the stories it tells, the stories it doesn't tell, perhaps. So we're going to get started, and I think we've got our first panel here that you wanted to talk about, which is the first scene in the tapestry.
Yeah, so what we see here, we should first mention that this image that we're using is available online.
Yes.
If you just Google Bayeux Tapestry, there is a website dedicated to the embroidery. And this is a high-res scan that has just recently been uploaded and made available. It's an amazing piece of technology.
It's
right?
super fun.
And you can zoom in and see the individual stitching. And so you're not just dependent on us for this. For this, anybody can get this. This isn't some secret historian trick to be able to have access.
So just to warn you, that's why I'm going to kind of be looking off camera to make sure we're showing you the right images.
And so what we see here in this first image is Edward, king, giving Harold some kind of instructions. Harold was sent to the continent, and he ends up captured by, which is a kind of a formality, but captured by a local duke, then brought to William, and he accompanies William on a campaign against the Breton duke in Brittany. And so what exactly Harold was doing there is unclear. And depending on which side of the conflict, which chronicler side of the conflict, the other sources you read, Harold was either there to offer William the crown, that Edward wanted William to be his successor, or he was there for some other reason unknown, that we don't really know what's going on here, but we do see this first scene kicks off with Edward still alive, and with Harold then going to the northern part of France.
Right. And this is one of those cool little things. He's got, falcons on his hand, which is a symbol of coming in peace, right?
It is, and it's also a symbol of hunting and royalty.
Mm-hmm.
One of the questions historians have asked about the conquest is, what did it do to change elite culture in England? And an earlier theory was that the Normans brought hunting and falconry with them, or at least emphasized that to a greater degree than the English kings did. But here we see in this image that hunting and falconry were part of English kingship. And there's a shared language of nobility across the channel. Otherwise, the falcon and the dogs make no sense.
Right. And just so y'all know, this is a cool stylized Bayeux Tapestry tree.
It's a tree, yes.
That also conveniently separates our panels into different sections. It's a comic strip.
It is. It's a comic strip or a graphic novel. I mean, if you understand how that language works, how those texts communicate, this is very much like that.
So here that they've joined together, they're getting feast. Here they are going on the boat.
And you can see them moving into the water. Wavy lines means water. You can see they're pulling their clothes up to wade into the water. Their legs are uncovered. They're carrying the dogs, the falcons, again bringing those symbols of royalty or of this shared elite culture with them.
And this is them on the way, right? There's Harold.
Yep, there's Harold driving as they cross the channel. Where exactly they left and where exactly they land are subjects of dispute. We don't know exactly where. There is a recent book called The Archaeology of the Bayeux Tapestry that seeks to use the landscape images in Bayeux to offer new theories about that, but we'll never. We'll never really know.
And so they've finally landed. Notice how they've hiked up their
long to get out
pants to get out of the boat, right? And then there's Guy saying, "Hey, you, I'm capturing you."
Yeah, and for arresting here, capturing, we want to understand this very formal process, right? An elite person has shown up unannounced and unexpected, that in somebody else's territory, and so to understand why they're there, they capture them, right? Bring them back to a place of power, a castle, and then whatever diplomacy is involved begins there.
Right.
So we don't want to think of capturing like prisoner of war kind of capturing.
Right.
We just want to think of this sort of, it's an aspect of diplomacy that if you're not expected in somebody else's territory, you are arrested so you can explain yourself.
Right. And notice too, this is something getting to modern medievalism and pop culture. We think that warriors and knights wore their armor everywhere they went. Look, here they are. They're carrying shields and spears, but they're unarmored because, again, this is sort of a escort / diplomatic formality, so they're not going to come looking to actually fight.
Yeah, and Harold is the same way, right? He and his men are unarmored, they're armed, of course, but they're unarmored. And the distinction here with the shields with the standards on them, a way of showing the nobility of the people with Guido.
Right. So there are those cool falcons again.
Yeah, they're everywhere, and they help us identify Harold, right? But they also help us understand the kind of context of action, that elite context of action.
And so, Harold is brought to the Normans, sort of, again, the diplomatic ceremony you're talking about. Again, another little thing that shows up on the tapestry we've just sort of gone with and assumed is the Normans seem to have shaved the back of their heads for the purposes of this tapestry.
Yeah, and we don't know exactly what that's all about. But it is clearly a visual cue to help you know the direction people are facing. Helps you with that. The armor and weaponry, when we get to that part of the tapestry, does. The mustaches on the English and the weird back shaved heads on the Normans are all part of a way, so you can at a glance figure out who's involved in the action.
Right. So then they finally come, and here's the first time you see William. And then there's this guy.
The little squire.
The dwarf, 2-year-old. If it is a dwarf.
If it is. Right. Height here. We don't, and maybe this is true for the whole tapestry, we're not too concerned about representing the world as they actually find it necessarily. Accuracy isn't always the point as much as we'd like it to be. Size here could indicate actual physical stature, or it could indicate status, right? And so smaller people, the bigger you are, the higher status you are, the more you're adorned. The higher status you are, the smaller you are, maybe the lower status you are. There's a relational aspect to size here too. So whether Tyrrell was actually smaller in life, or whether he's just in a position to be represented as smaller, or that is represented by smaller, is again something we don't really know.
And just to show you how we can hyper overanalyze some things, he's also, notice he's got the shaved back of the head Norman look, but he's also got a beard. I think he's the only bearded Norman in the entire tapestry.
I think he might be. And again, is that because of status? Right, there was a time in early medieval continental history when hair indicated status. If we remember the Merovingian kings of the 7th and 8th century, known famously in medieval scholarship as the long-haired kings, because their hair, they didn't cut their hair, but everybody else had to.
Right.
And there is a fantastic essay by Paul Dutton on Charlemagne's mustache and what it meant to wear facial hair as a Frankish noble, kind of in contrast to the Franks, the Carolingians who followed the Merovingians, cut their hair but didn't shave their face necessarily. So facial hair here is like size and like clothing, like everything else, falconry or whatever, an indicator of status as much as it is a comment on how that person might have looked in life.
Or could the embroiderer simply have wanted to give a guy a beard?
Well, and then we don't know. I mean, we could. I mean, there are a lot of questions about why certain things appear. If you look here in the top corner over the name Guido, right up there's a centaur. Why is there a centaur? Right. Why there are lots of centaurs actually in the margins of this embroidery, and so why is it there? Does it mean anything? Well, it must mean something, but does it mean anything for the story? Not necessarily, right? And you see a lot of fantastic creatures in the top and bottom margins. Right.
And I love this. Their hair is blowing in the wind to indicate they're moving really fast.
One of the things I really love about this tapestry, as a historian who's interested in things like emotions and senses, is the way that they can convey movement, they can convey emotion with gestures and with maybe with facial expressions. Those things aren't necessarily read transparently. Their facial expressions for emotions might be different from ours for the same emotion, but it was meant to convey action, right? It was meant to convey the experiences it depicts, not just tell a story. And it is, if you think of it that way, it is immersive. If you think of what it feels like to have your wind blowing as you move fast, even if you've never ridden a horse, you get a sense of what's being shown here.
Right. Yes, I love that. Okay, I guess we gotta move a little bit faster because we can do this forever, folks. By the way, look, what is that, Dr. Greene?
Well, it depends on what you want it to be.
No,
it's a building.
It's a building.
So it's a building.
A stylized building.
And you can see in those stylized descriptions, the way that they're decorated also tells you who built them. There are squares, there are circles, there are diamond shapes, and they vary by by whatever group we're talking about. So English buildings look different than Norman buildings, which look different than buildings in Brittany.
Right. It's the details. So yeah, here they are. So here's William. There's Harold.
Yeah, and you'll see they both
I'm sorry,
have falcons.
No, there's William.
Yeah, and so then now they both have falcons, right? And so we have here those symbols continuing through the action. If you know what the falcon means, you can track the action and the players.
And feel free to stop me anytime I'm going somewhere.
No. We should tell the story.
There's just all kinds of falcons. So this just looks devious, right? This is court politics. There sits, and they're whisper, whisper, whisper. Have you heard this? And here's the news. And they're pointing. What are they pointing at?
Well, he's pointing at that guy for some reason, or maybe he's saying we're going to go over here, or I've been sent from over here. And so we have those court scenes. And while he might be whispering, right, the other thing this reminds us is that all court stuff took place in some kind of public, right? That he might have to whisper in this instance, or maybe he's announcing, and that's what that hand gesture means, so everybody can hear the news he's brought. We don't know whether it is conspiratorial and whispering, or whether he's announcing the news that Edward sent him with.
Right. And here's another one of the great mysteries.
Yeah, who is this woman?
Elfgifa.
Elfgifa, yeah. Who is Elfgifa? There is some a little bit we know that it's a name that turns up in records from Wilton Abbey as an abbess and as a relative of the royal family in England. And so if this is her, it's a fascinating scene, because if this is Elfgifa, the one we know that was eventually the abbess of Wilton Abbey, what this is probably showing is her miraculous cure of blindness at a saint shrine in England. And if that's what this is showing, it prefigures Harold's death with an arrow through his eye. And so who is this woman? If that's her,
right.
It also tells us that Wilton Abbey is important for the making of this tapestry, at least the story it's telling. But if that is the same Elfgifa, then and it's telling that story of miraculous cure of blindness, then there's a juxtaposition there between her blindness cure and Harold's blinding death.
Right. All right. So here they are, armed to go to battle. And see this building here? You can go see this today, folks.
You can. It's Mont Saint-Michel, which was an important monastery in the early medieval period. The Carolingians promoted it as a royal monastery. They built it up from its earlier foundations. And it's there, and it's an important part of this story, because this is how Harold proves himself to William as he rescues, here in this scene here, as he rescues members of William's entourage from quicksand, from the sort of wet, sandy ground. Mont Saint-Michel is on a peninsula that at certain times of the year, the tides cut off completely from the mainland. And so it's a dangerous place to cross. And here it's another, if we look at the bottom register too, here another prefiguring, where Harold here rescues William's troops, thus proving his loyalty to William. But the eels at the bottom, in the bottom register, typically connote slipperiness or deceit. And so it's a false loyalty, right? At the same time as he's outwardly showing his loyalty to William, he will ultimately betray him. And maybe the eels are a symbol that that's what's happening here.
They lay siege to a castle.
Yeah, this is a great scene. Not just because the Duke's, whose castle it was, name is Conan, but because this is part of the tapestry that's somewhat mysterious. This is a campaign against the Breton Duke, Conan II, and there he is, sliding down a rope, escaping his burning castle. And there's a lot of question about why this scene is even in the tapestry. It has nothing to do with the conquest. There was some military activity on that border in the years leading up to 1066, but nothing like the sustained campaign that we see here. One historian has posited that because the Breton scene is so important, that the tapestry was actually made on the continent in the Loire Valley, just south of where all of this would have been. It's one of the many theories about where it was made, and it comes solely from the inclusion of this series of events that really have nothing to do with the story, except for the very end of that of that campaign as shown here.
Right.
But the details, they show them with besieging and burning besieging
Right.
one, burning it, bypassing the one at Rennes,
Right.
and then besieging and burning a second one.
Dinants.
Two of those castles, Mott and Bailey style castles, which is just building on a hill. No evidence of a Mott or a Bailey in those regions. So what they're doing there, what they mean, and why there's so much time and space in what was a laborious object to create, given to this Breton scene, is one of the great mysteries of the tapestry.
And look, there they are surrendering the town.
Right, handing over the keys.
Spear point to spear point. Yeah. And then,
and this is maybe why it was included, where William gives Harold arms, and that can mean one of two things. It could mean that, and by William's faction, it was claimed that Harold became William's vassal, right? Swore some sort of oath of loyalty and service to William. It could also mean that he was rewarded for doing well in battle, right? Both of those things are possible. I would say that typically you give arms to somebody who's done well in battle, to somebody who's of lower status than you, because they might not be able to afford them themselves. Harold, obviously high status,
right.
Didn't need armor and a sword, right, from William. So with either of those interpretations, though, something is happening here, something important for the later story about William and Harold's competing claims to the throne. And so the Breton scene is necessary for this moment, but the question is, why so much of it, right?
Right.
Why do you need so much of the Breton scene?
Because, this scene is crucial to their relationship. Let me go ahead and skip a little bit here. This one is
absolutely
important.
Crucial for it. And so, again, what's happening here is ambiguous. Harold sacramentum fecit Wilhelmo Duci. Harold swears an oath to William.
What oath?
What oath? What are the contents? It's clearly a sacramental occasion, right? It takes place probably in a cathedral that's being rebuilt. It's a little bit of a strange scene because the little lumps down there at the bottom of Harold's feet typically indicate cobblestones, an outdoor space. And so why there are two reliquaries sitting outdoors and William is sitting indoors is a question, but we know that that there's a cathedral being rebuilt at the time. And if William is sitting in under the part that's been rebuilt and the sacred part is the part they're still constructing, then this makes some sense. But he's swearing an oath, and not just any old oath, but he's swearing on two different reliquaries, one of which is probably a portable altar. So there's something clearly sacramental about this, something binding about it. But again, what oath, right? What oath?
Up to the interpreter. So then they go back home.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, look, there he is. And then they go, and this image is also really interesting.
So here is Harold back with William, right? Reporting the news.
Edward.
Back with Edward. Yes. Sorry, back with Edward. Yes, Edward. Reporting the news, relating the contents of his mission, the success or failure of it. Harold's posture is the interesting part, I think. Bowed forward, slumped over, some sort of submissive posture. Is he reporting bad news? Is William reprimanding him? Or is he just sort of acknowledging his superior, his social superior, political superior? Again, we don't know, but the posture is interesting. Again, an indoor and an outdoor hybrid space. Mm-hmm. Cobblestones underneath Harold again. Purpose unknown.
Well, and I think that, this being Westminster, mm-hmm. which was Edward's pet project in his later years, and here it is, putting the weathercock up top, which is the official finishing. Yeah. We're done. Here is God himself blessing it. And then, oh no.
Then this is the maybe the most poignant scene. The second most poignant scene. We skipped over. No, it'll be coming. What I think is the most poignant scene in the tapestry. But this is the death scene, right? An act in 3 parts with William sick up in the top. He's on his deathbed, surrounded by his bishop, members of his family, and his wife there at the foot of the bed, weeping. William dead underneath it, being wrapped probably.
Edward
again. I keep doing it. I keep doing William and Edward. I keep doing it. And William's coming to be king. So Edward again dead, being wrapped in an oxhide or some sort of binding cloth, and then being taken on his funeral procession. Right, people behind him with gestures that we can interpret as gestures of mourning. The hand over the heart in 3 cases. The bishop, the one with the crooked staff. And the other 2 clerics, pallbearers, people ringing bells as the king's corpse moves from palace to place of burial, beating the ground as the king approaches. The pallbearers in the front, and so we get the death scene, right? And this is where the action really begins.
Right. And interestingly enough, I think this is the only place in the tapestry where we sort of have the narrative moving backwards in space, because here's Westminster being finished, then here he is dead, there he is dying, and they're carrying him to be buried in Westminster.
Yeah, if you're reading it literally, he's buried before he's dead, right?
Right.
And again, why those narrative decisions were made or something, we'll never know. But it is an interesting part of the tapestry. And then Harold, right? Harold crowned king, and again, depending on which version of the events you were a partisan of, crowned licitly or in violation of the oath he swore to William. One of the interesting things about the Archbishop Stigand is the pallium that he's holding, that scarf-looking thing. That would have been sent to him by the Pope as a sort of sign of his authority, but this one was sent by an anti-pope. There's a crisis of papal succession, and so we're not sure if that it didn't invalidate Stigand's reign, unless you're on William's side of the anointing of the blessing and anointing of the king, right? Stigand is still Archbishop, but if you want to point out that his pallium was given to him by the wrong Pope, you might want to prominently display it in the blessing of the king.
Right.
This is a really interesting scene, both for the top and the bottom register. So it's Halley's Comet, right, which did appear in 1066, although not at the time of year that all this happened. But it is Halley's Comet. Comets, as with other natural phenomena, were important parts of the way medieval people understood their world, that comets prefigured some sort of momentous event. Not necessarily disastrous, although if it's a momentous event, it's probably disastrous for somebody, but not necessarily a disaster, but some event of importance. Right, and here in the bottom register, you see these sort of outlines of ships, the ghost ships, prefiguring the William's fleet sailing from Normandy, and so the comet and the ships are kind of juxtaposed around Harold as he hears that William is gathering his army.
And then word gets to William.
Yes, that Harold has been crowned king.
Oh, he's angry. He's angry, people.
He's gonna make his boats.
He's going to have someone make the boats for him.
Well, yes, he isn't going to make.
He's Duke.
Well, if the king commands it, he might as well have done it, right?
But there's lots of neat little material culture details of the tools they're using.
There are. You can, of course, with this amazing scan, get in and see those tools, look at the construction techniques.
It's just fascinating.
And see them there. They're dragging their boats.
One of my favorite
moving
scenes.
The armor and the weapons. And the wine, very important.
Yes.
Right. That here they drag a cart with wine and weapons. Right.
Right.
And so moving all their supplies to be able to embark for England.
And the horses, right? Because they're Norman cavalrymen.
Yeah, one of the key components.
I
mean, I'm not a military historian, but one of the key components of battle is that the Normans used cavalry and the English really didn't. And even though the English had the high ground in the battle.
Right.
The Normans were able to break the shield.
They were much more mobile.
Yeah.
Much more mobile. And then we have a lot of ships here to give an indication of this is a big fleet. This is not just 10 or 12
And again,
ships.
that's one of the things I love about this from kind of a sensory perspective is you get a sense of the magnitude, right, as you're watching it, and we'll talk about the battle scenes too.
Back up a little bit. You can see how many ships there
are. As you're watching, it's like ship after ship after ship after ship. And here they come, and the horses come off.
Yeah, the horses are coming ashore.
Yeah.
They mount up. Don't even have time to put their helmets on. And
here they're raiding the countryside for supplies.
Cooking some kebabs.
Yep. Cooking the fruits of their despoiling of the countryside.
Right. Ooh, rotisserie.
Yes. And this is an interesting scene too. So here we see Bishop Odo of Bayeux, right? And he's right there. He's the bigger one, right? His head sticks up above everybody else's. He's got the tonsure. And it's interesting because he's not a significant part of this story unless he was the patron of the tapestry. And this is where most historians would argue you see the patronage. Odo caused this to be made to glorify himself and his connections to William, his half-brother, I think, connections to William. And it's not just a feasting scene, it's reminiscent of the iconography of the Last Supper.
Right.
And so you have Odo in this prominently spiritual position when he wasn't involved at all, really, in anything that's been happening in the tapestry or is to come in the narrative.
Right. But it must be Friday. Look.
Yeah, the fish, right? Other people eat meat. Odo eats fish. Either he's got that humble clerical diet ingrained in him, or it's Friday or Wednesday or Sunday, because medieval people fasted on and ate fish on abstained from meat on different days that we did.
And I love this. So they start building a castle. And again, the tools, I happen to have a reproduction of a shovel.
Just like that. You can build your own castle here at the History Center. Right? Your kingdom starts here. But yeah, you see the tools. You see them raising one of these, we call them again, Mott and Bailey castles, enclosure on top of a hill as they in the place where they land. This, I think, is the most poignant scene.
Oh, yes.
So here they are. They're in the English countryside, burning and raiding their way through it. And you see a woman and her son fleeing their burning house. As the Normans torch it, and it's just this sort of moment of pathos in the middle of this long narrative about elite politics and succession and sanctity, and here we see sort of the everyday.
They don't even have words, right?
No, we don't know who they are. It's not a poor house, obviously, but there they are fleeing their burning house.
And then the classic arming of the hero before the battle, right there. And then the battle begins. And believe it or not, I don't think we'll spend a ton of time on the battle, even though it's like the last third of the tapestry, but there's a ton of cool stuff.
Yeah, there's great detail, of course. The thing that gets to me is the bottom register during the battle.
Yes.
That as we scroll through the battle, you of course see the combat and the weapons and the armor and all of that, but at a certain point in the battle, you begin to see the body count build up in the bottom register.
The leaders of the army carrying probably like ancient Roman centurions.
Some sort of signal of office or of status.
Yes, they're on a hill here. The English spy the Normans. There's Harold. Mounted.
Right. Mounted. Strangely, I think.
Right.
Mounted, but mounted and armed and armored, of course.
But I've got a little poster of this scene. Of them facing opposite directions, right?
Yeah.
And as you say, the battle begins. There's the Norman cavalry charging, attacking.
So important. Archers also an important part. Yeah, also an important part of the Norman tactics.
And again, to give the idea that the Normans there's so many of them that start coming.
Yeah, and here is where, as you're scrolling, you really start to pay attention to the bottom register.
Right there.
Because from here to the end of the tapestry, it's just one body after another, after another, after another. And that would have been striking in person. I actually think scrolling through it here makes it more striking, that every time you move, there's another set of bodies.
Right.
And they just don't end. And they're in various states of integrity. Here, they're mostly whole. They're bits and pieces of bodies in the later register, in the later part of the tapestry.
Armor and shields and axes and knives, and this poor guy down here.
Yeah, squire of some kind, unarmed combatant. But there's a decapitated body at the bottom. It's just an incredibly moving record of slaughter. That you can focus on the nobility part all you want, but they're doing all of this literally in the tapestry on a ground littered with bodies. Right.
Even the shields and that. There's
everything's broken.
Head.
Yeah, dismembered head, broken sword. And you really there's one amazing battle scene.
And this one, cutting the head off of an axe. Just
lopping the head off of an axe. Surprising. This is my favorite scene in the battle part of the tapestry. This is the chaos of war, right? Horses turned upside down, people, head to the ground, feet in the air, falling over, desperately holding onto reins and bridles, and then underneath still the bodies pile up, right? Human and horse.
And it's not to brag. I've done this, right? I've been on a horse in armor when the horse just
decided not to do it. Yeah,
something goes wrong, you trip, the horse falls, and you go flying, and you don't know midair if you're going to live or not. And there was no one actually trying to kill me when I did this. I was just riding along in the armor.
Just advanced.
Right,
horse,
right.
but yeah, that scene for the sheer chaos of battle, that scene I think is really fantastic. But again, the body after body, just every time I look at it, it strikes me body after body after body piles up the sort of human cost of what's happening in the middle register.
And here's the fear, the unarmed sort of not to use a bad word, but militia, right? The militia of the English sort of surrounded on this hill.
Yeah,
and the Normans riding them down,
and there was a fake retreat and a breaking of the shield wall, the line on the top of the hill.
Right. Odo in totally different armor.
Yeah, but with a club though, right? With a club because you don't shed blood.
Right.
Although that prohibition is not really part of clerical life in this period, but it's still not a good thing for a bishop to do.
Right.
But bishops were warriors too, and we can remember that by studying.
And I love this scene. They think he's dead.
Right, and he's got to uncover his face to show everybody he's not dead. There was apparently a rumor on the battlefield that William had been killed, and so he's like, "No, I'm alive."
Don't worry,
then
guys.
there's somebody pointing at him to let you know he's William.
And then these Norman archers kick back in. Right, a lot of archers start their business.
And then the bodies pile up.
And look, the bodies start piling up again. Look at the arrows stuck in the shield. And this is also a brutal scene, right? He's got the guy by the hair of his head.
Right? Yeah, he's about to hit him in the neck.
Again, look at this. The battle's gone far enough so that these
people are looting. Yeah, stripping the armor off, whether to recover to be used again or whether to be looting the battlefield. It was, I think, an all-day battle. This sort of makes the Norman force seem overpowering, but it was a kind of a back and forth all-day affair at Hastings or at battle. Where battle.
And that's the thing too. Most medieval battles lasted an hour or two because one side would eventually give. This was very unusual in that it lasted brutally all day.
Yeah,
long.
It was
too dark.
A huge event, and the sort of numbers help with that. We think they were roughly evenly matched. They wore similar. They had similar arms and armor. The Normans had more archers and cavalry, but they had similar arms and armor. The English occupied the high ground, and if there's a great debate about where exactly the battle was. The official battle site isn't necessarily where the battle was fought. There's a theory that it was fought on the road, slightly off of where the battle site is now, and that ground would have been soft, full of trees and brush. It would have made it hard to get up the hill, harder than it normally is to get up the hill. So it took the Normans a long time to get up and break the shield wall, and they had to use this feigned retreat to then break the English shield wall and take the hill. So it took all day, which is not, as you say, not what a medieval battle.
Right, and it contributed to the slaughter. Mm-hmm. And here is, you could say, the crisis moment of the entire battle and the entire conquest.
Yeah, here it is. Harold dies. There he is. There is a theory I was reading over the weekend that the arrow was a later addition to the tapestry.
I've seen that.
That it was embroidered in later, either by somebody in the medieval period or as part of the 19th century reconstruction of it and restoration of it. But without the arrow, his positioning doesn't make a lot of sense. Right. So we're not sure really what's going on there. But if we remember back to the blinding and the miraculous cure, then here's Harold legendarily being shot through the eye with an arrow, which caused him to die.
Right. Or, some people have said that this is also Harold blinded, and then they ride through and they hack his body apart.
Yeah, and that's certainly in the chronicles, that he wasn't just killed, but he was dismembered. He was butchered on the battlefield. So since this doesn't have to take place, as we saw with the burial scene, in linear time, they could both be Harold, right? And there would be no problem with that.
And then, basically, it's the end of the day. It's getting dark. They're finishing off the last of the English huscarls right here. And then they take off after the retreating English.
And that's where what we have of the tapestry ends.
There was probably more to it, though, right?
There certainly must have been. That it is damaged. All of that stuff we see there at the end is 19th century restoration. So none of that stuff, the darker looking stuff, the stuff that's kind of cut out around, all of that is later addition and restoration. So we don't have the end of it. Right? We don't know how the story ends. There have been attempts to recreate what might have been the story based on chronicle accounts of the battle. You would expect a coronation scene, William's coronation scene, to be at the end, but we don't know. Right? And the assumption is there's more there, or was more there.
Because they wrapped it up in a roll to preserve it, and it's the end. Right? It's like if you have a roll of paper towel, and this is so simplistic. If you've got a roll of paper towels in your car, it's always the outside part that gets raveled and pulled on, and the inside's okay. Yeah. Same thing with the tapestry.
Yeah, and so the end of the tapestry damaged in some way. We don't know. We don't know if anything, what else was there.
Knowing how folks back then loved symmetry, like myself, I have to think it's William.
Yeah, I would think so too.
The same way at the very beginning, it's Edward crown.
Yes,
right?
And then we saw Harold's crowning. Right, and
so which is almost in the exact middle.
Yeah, and so we would expect Williams as well to bring closure to the story, but also just narratively to offset Harold's. Right, if you have Edward clearly crowned and Harold clearly crowned, and William just winning a battle, then the story's incomplete. Right, and Harold is still the crowned king of England according to the tapestry. He's the last one we saw with that ceremony. So we would expect a crowning ceremony to have been at the end.
So we got through the whole thing.
We have
somehow. What does the thing represent? And in 3 minutes, tell me what 3 minutes. What does all this mean?
I think the way I like to think about it is that it's about historical memory, right? It's about claiming the narrative. If it was woven on the continent, then that tells us one thing about its patronage. If it was Odo's patronage, that tells us another thing. It was certainly influenced by the artistic style of manuscript decoration in and around Cambridge in England. And so that tells us something else. And so this is an attempt to control the narrative of this incredibly disruptive event, as you said in your introduction, of this sort of significant change in terms of the government of England and in continental history. And so this is like statues and memorials today about claiming a version of the past, right? That legitimizes the present that the patron and their intended audience for the tapestry lived in. And that's the way I like to think about Bayeux. It's not a narrative of the events that's independent of the social context that created it. It's not meant to tell you the true story. It's not meant to depict it accurately or realistically. It's meant to claim the past, given whatever conditions of the present the patron was involved in.
So that doesn't delegitimize the tapestry.
Absolutely not.
It just it's the lens you have to be aware of.
Yeah, it is. I think one of the mistakes or dangers in using material culture is we expect visual representations to be more true than textual representations. And whether that's the accuracy of the tapestry itself or whether it's the accuracy of the story the tapestry tells. But here, I don't think, and with material culture generally, I don't think that's the way we want to think about it. We want to think about this as a version of the story, where there are plenty of competing textual versions of the story floating around and probably other visual versions of it that haven't survived.
Right.
And so it is about historical memory. How did the generation later, the 1080s, how did people remember the event that led to William's crowning, probably from William's perspective?
Mm-hmm. Well, and I know we want to start taking questions, but I'm going to start off with the first question, and then we'll go to the other ones. If the tapestry is the Norman version, William's effort to legitimize his claim to the throne and how he got there, how did the competing versions, why were they so welcomed into literally the cloth of this tapestry?
Yeah, and I don't know. I think
and you may not be able to answer.
No, I think that, but there is speculation about this. One of the alternatives for patronage is that Edith, who was Edward's sister, that Edith commissioned the tapestry as a healing event to bring both sides of the story together, where both Harold's family and William's family contribute to the moving forward of England after the conquest. And that's why Harold, and it's Harold's sort of flaw that he didn't keep his oath. Right, but had he kept the oath he swore, right, William still would have been king, but none of this would have happened.
There would have been bodies.
There would have been bodies in the bottom register for 50 feet, right? And so there is that interesting speculation about patronage and about Harold's inclusion, that it was a way of addressing that sort of both sidism that we really kind of hate in the contemporary world, right? But it was a way of bringing people together, healing. After this momentous event. And so that is a potential answer to that question. Why is Harold so prominent? The other thing is, that he's there to highlight his duplicity, right? That William was legitimate not by conquest, but because Edward said he should be the king. And it's only Harold, after going through all of this, the Breton campaign, saving the lives of William's men, getting the arms, swearing the oath. It's only after all of that legitimate stuff was undone by his breaking of the oath that the conquest was necessary. So you can see Harold as legitimizing William in the entire tapestry if you want to. If you want to think about him as the conveyor of the message from Edward that William should be king. Right. If that's what was happening in that first scene, then Harold's inclusion is just to highlight how duplicitous he was.
You can't have a superhero without a supervillain.
That's right.
Right.
That's right.
Yeah. All right. Now we can get to some, hopefully we've got some great questions in the chat.
Indeed. Hello, everyone. This is Libba from Behind the Scenes. And before we get to questions, I wanted to give a shout out to all the folks that donated toward our March donation goal. Thank you so much to Sue for your generous $50 donation. Wow. Thank you so much. And Denise for your $5 donation that got us to our goal. And then we exceeded our goal thanks to Janet's $25 donation. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
We really appreciate that. So our
Take that, March goal.
Yeah. So I'm going to go with Carol's question first. And you may have addressed this a little bit earlier, but can you tell us who is credited with creating this tapestry and the types of skills that were involved in the actual creation?
So we don't know, right, is the short answer. There are lots of competing theories. The consensus, the dominant theory in the scholarship, seems to be that Odo, Bishop of Bayeux, had this thing made. And the consensus also seems to be that it was actually made in or around Cambridge in England. And that's based on the way the images in the tapestry match some manuscripts that we know were made in Cambridge at approximately the same time. So the short answer, the safe answer is Odo commissioned it, and it was woven by nuns in or around Cambridge. The longer answer is there are 5 or 6 good competing theories with that. More so for the patron than the weaving. The correlation in visual style between the tapestry and the manuscripts in Cambridge is pretty convincing, I think, although open to debate. The Loire Valley theory that I mentioned earlier. But the patronage of the tapestry is certainly not secure with Odo. It does help to explain why he gets to be Jesus in the Last Supper.
Right.
But other than that, other than his insertion, he could have been connected to networks of patronage in or around Cambridge, whether they're Edith's or somebody else's. And so just because he's there doesn't mean he's the one that commissioned it, although that seems to be the consensus. As for the skill, I mean, if we can zoom in tightly on the stitches, you can see just how laborious this is.
This was,
like, we call it a tapestry, as Glenn said at the beginning, but it isn't a tapestry. It's an embroidery that the figures are made up of individual stitches in different colored threads. And so you can see here and imagine just how much went into making this. It was probably made embroidered on a piece of cloth stretched out with different women working at different stations, embroidering different parts of it. It's far too much for one person to ever have embroidered by themselves. So a team of nuns working on embroidery, they would have had those skills because embroidery was an important part of what elite women and cloistered women did in the medieval period. So skill-wise, both royal women and nuns would have had those skills, and time-wise, cloistered nuns certainly would have had. This would have been the work they performed in the abbey instead of farming or whatever other types of monastic work would have been expected of people.
Our next question comes from Kevin, and Kevin says, my ancestor Humphrey de Bohun, also known as With the Beard, is apparently depicted in the banquet scene number 58. Any insight? So perhaps if we can find that banquet scene. Yes. I do know that you can, oh yeah, there you go.
Man, was that close. That one?
This is 58 we're trying to find. So I think
the numbers at the bottom are the...
But you can actually...
there's not a banquet scene at 58, though.
Oh, let's find out. Let's see.
Because that's
It's in the battle.
Oh, okay. So maybe the banquet scene was what.
Yes, we have a number of banquet scenes.
Got
We
it.
have the Odo banquet, the most famous one, and we have a few others.
I wonder if he's talking about this guy.
The one with the beard. Well,
Yeah.
he's certainly the only bearded one.
Right.
And I don't know anything about him as a person or how that identification was made. He's certainly not named on the tapestry. Only a few people are in the embroidered words. So I don't know anything about your ancestor, unfortunately. But if he was known as the bearded one and he was at Odo's banquet, then that's got to be him. Right. That's got to be him. I'm sorry I don't know the details. The Norman aristocracy is not my period, and so knowing the details of the individuals involved in the conquest and the campaign in William's dukedom is just not. I don't drill down into the 11th century in that detail.
Still a very cool connection.
Yes,
We're glad to have
absolutely.
you here today. Our next question, let's see. I think this was near the battle scene, and we had a question. Does it say Evgaver, like the name of the abbess? Evgaver?
Oh, that's.
Let's see if we
further
can find
back.
that scene for you.
No, that's further back than that. Wait, where's the arrows? There are the arrows.
Evgaver.
That must be that one. That's not the battle scene, but I don't think they.
Yeah, so
named...
that's Aelfgiva. So it's AE connected in what we call a ligature. AELFGYVA. That's the name of the woman depicted in that scene. And so here, ubi unus clericus, one cleric, and Aelfgiva.
Okay, there you go.
All right, we're gonna. Sorry,
We got two people trying to drive the mouse today.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
just wanted to
it's
check
not
to see
working.
if we have any more questions in the chat. We do have a few folks that were able to actually see the tapestry in person.
Oh,
which
fantastic.
is just so cool.
Yeah, I haven't been able to. We were talking before this.
Yeah.
I haven't been able to see it in person yet. But this is a good time to remind everybody that UNG does have a reproduction of it.
Yes.
That it's held in the art department, I think.
Mhm.
And it was given to us by a judge, a Georgia judge, if I have that right. That we have it's painted, not embroidered. But UNG does have a reproduction. It's been here at the History
Yes,
Center
been here
before.
a couple of times.
And so I don't have access to it, or I'd say come by the office and I'd let you see it. They don't give it to the medievalists, but we do have a reproduction of it, and there's a possibility we can get it out at some point in the future.
And have a display, yeah.
Have a display.
Our next question comes from Helen. Helen wonders, what might these centaurs represent?
Yeah, I don't know what centaurs would have meant in the 11th century. The margins are littered with fantastic creatures of all kinds,
Griffin,
mythological creatures,
peacock.
royal creatures, unlikely combinations of creatures. There's a centaur. And much like, we have this question too with medieval manuscripts, which often have fantastic beast-like figures, mythological figures, or other improbable combinations in their margins. We don't know what it represents. Why do medieval people draw a snail with a knight coming out of it? Why
There are lots of those.
snails. Why are there rabbits killing people in the margins of medieval manuscripts?
Right.
The medieval killer bunnies. We don't know why those things were there. They're obviously decorative in some way, but we don't know why. Why those types of creatures, why specific creatures, it's impossible for us to know. They have nothing to do with the story, right?
Unfortunately,
they have nothing to do with the story, so they're there to fill out the register. Sometimes the stuff in the register matters. We talked about the ghost ships in the bottom. There's a scene in the bottom register of planting, which indicates seasonality, right? That something took place in the spring. So sometimes we can tell why the stuff is in the margins, but then those things that we can do that with tend to not be creatures like centaurs, right? They tend to be humans or natural phenomenon or ghost ships or something that we can make sense of. But what might they mean? I don't know.
We wish we knew.
I like to think of them as self-portraits. There's a nun welcoming you in to view her work, although probably not, right? There are as many interpretations as there are people who look at these things, and there's no way to know.
Our next question comes from Janet. Janet's wondering, any estimates of how long it would have taken to produce the entire tapestry?
I don't know. Years. I would say. Years. And so we think that it was finished in the 1080s. And so if it was started in the early 1070s, I wouldn't be surprised if it would take a decade to do something this big. I don't know, though, how long it would take to embroider.
Well, and you have to remember this: they can't just run to Hobby Lobby to get their needles and their colored thread, right? They have to start off harvesting crops, turning the linen into thread, weaving the background or the base. Then they have to dye all the different colors. Then an artist has to come in and draw the images and, make this horse blue, make this head brown. Then the nuns come in and over the course of years begin to slowly fill in, because remember, this is not painted. Right.
Those are
individual threads and stitches put there to solidly fill in the horses.
Yeah, and we don't know how involved the nuns were with all of those processes. It's possible, indeed probable, they're spinning the thread themselves. Whether they wove the linen background or whether it came over from Flanders, which is likely, given the textile trade at the time. But they could have easily done the spinning, the dyeing, the drawing, and the embroidering. Right? We don't need to think of outside people for any part of this process at all. At all, this could be an entirely female-produced product. Or there could have been a professional artist, a manuscript illuminator, who could have also been a woman, but could have also been a man, which is why they match so well with the Cambridge manuscript images. There are a lot of possibilities there, but just the weaving itself would have taken years.
Right. Monasteries have legacy projects. They're not concerned with timelines.
Yeah, and there would have been an urgency only in the sense of this is during William's reign, and we want to start it to validate the reign. Right, if that's how we're going to interpret it. But if it took 10 years, it took 10 years. And if it validated William's successor instead of William, it's the same project.
All right. Well, I think we have answered all our questions in the queue. So I guess I think you may have mentioned y'all's favorite part of the tapestry, but I think it would be fun to end on what your favorite part is.
What's your single?
I don't know if I have a favorite. I think that I think Conan sliding down the rope he's got a pointed hat, right? He's kind of funny. The rope is impossibly stiff, right? So that's a funny scene to me. Escaping the burning castle. I think that the woman and her son fleeing the burning house is probably my favorite in the sense of a historian of emotions, thinking about how not how emotions are. There's Conan. Yeah, there's Conan. Conan II, which means there are at least two ducal Conans in Brittany, which very much I'm sure it's not pronounced Conan, but and I'll apologize to all the Bretons who see this. But I think that image of the mother and the son, or maybe the image of Edith at the foot of Edward's bed, weeping, because that tells us about the interaction between image and viewer. And how, while you can find expressions of emotion in the gestures and the facial expressions of the people, these scenes were meant to elicit emotion, right? Not to display it. Right. And as an historian of emotions, that's where I find this tapestry to be at its most powerful. Here, the death scene or the pathos of the court, the body count of the battle, those things that would have elicited a specific emotional reaction from the viewer, and were obviously intended to do that. That to me is how this is at its most powerful.
Yeah, it's hard for me to pick one. I've been obsessed with this thing since I was a child. I think, of course, like so many folks, they get fascinated with the military stuff and the knights riding around. But I think the more I read about it, you have, like I said, that arming of the hero part, right? Because that, I think, lends itself to being an English-made piece, because that arming of the hero, even though we're smack dab in the middle of Christianity, that Germanic idea of everyone getting ready before the battle, that emotion of before the battle, not during it, but the dread, the hopes, and everything that come out of that I think everyone back then would have gotten that. Yeah. Right?
Yeah, it's
in a very visceral way.
They're expecting that scene because it's part of their narrative culture. Right? They're used to hearing that part of heroic stories.
Right. Libba, can we go for another hour?
I wish. Actually, it's fascinating. We do have one last question. This is a good one from Helen, asking: is there anything else comparable to the historic work? So, the handwork and the embroidery. Is there anything to compare this to?
Not this big.
Not this involved. Of course, there's lots of embroidery, handwork,
but it's like
textile work.
You've got pieces left that are this big.
There's nothing of this scale that has survived. I think when you think of tapestries themselves in the later Middle Ages, you can begin to compare in terms of work and craftsmanship. I'm thinking of that famous unicorn tapestry in the Musée de Cluny in Paris. So I think in the later Middle Ages, some of that stuff has survived, but textiles are so perishable in terms of their survival rate as material objects. So we don't know if anything like this has disappeared, but certainly nothing from this early in the medieval period has survived on this scale that would talk to us about craftsmanship and all the rest.
Right. That's all we've got time for, unfortunately, folks. Thank you so much for joining us. Dr. Greene, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It was a great talk.
This is so much fun. This is so much fun. And thank all of you who were able to donate and help us reach our March goal. That really does make a difference in what we're able to accomplish in keeping the programs going like this one. And don't forget, we have a members live stream this Friday for members only about the history of agriculture in Georgia. If you're not a member and you want to see that, make sure you click in the link in the chat on how to become a member. But as always, keep watching us, keep telling your friends. Thanks for tuning in, and stay safe and take care. We'll see you later.